What do we mean when we say the words good and evil? In the times of Trump, this may seem clear and obvious, even intuitive. We think we know very well what we mean when we judge that something is good or bad, but when you try to put those judgments into a system or justify them according to a universal standard, we find difficulty. What prompts us to believe that there is such a thing as good and evil? What's the value of values? Is there an objective moral universe to be found in nature, or are morals human creations? Hello, welcome again to this episode of the Pseudo-Intellectuals. That lovely intro was written by our own Paul Chatlin.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
And beside me here is Chris Ferguson.
Hey.
I looked this way because, wait, this way? Hi. There we go. I'll get it figured out one day. But, and of course, John Ellis behind is with us on the board. Hello.
Hey, John.
Hi, everybody.
Behind the scenes.
How are you
Thanks,
doing?
John, again.
Of course. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeffrey. Hey, Louise. Chris, but that's you.
Cool. Okay. Sorry. Yes, I realized I had yet to pop out the chat and I was like, I don't see anybody. What's wrong with me? All right. Yeah. So, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Trisha and Jeffrey and Luis. Luis, I wanted to thank you for that link, by the way. Right after the show, you posted a link. And I encourage anybody who's listening, all 5 of you, to drop any links that you see, anything that you find pertinent to our discussions into chat or to DM me through Slack. Yeah. And
share
today,
the information.
That's right. Knowledge is power. And we'll be talking all about power today. We're going to get into some Nietzsche, who's, if you're familiar at all with Nietzsche, has a lot of things to say about power. But we're going to start with a little more Plato from.
Of course.
Can't get enough of that Plato.
All right.
We're going to get into.
Yeah, I'm definitely.
I had a huge, it froze on me.
All right.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
All right.
Sorry about that,
Oh, yeah.
guys.
So, yeah.
Hello.
Hey, everybody, I apologize. We just had a total Comcast drop. We're back, and you probably missed about the last 20 seconds of what Ash was having to say. So back it up, Ash.
Damn it.
All right.
So
try
good.
it. Give another rundown.
Oh, it's just the pre-cap. Is that what you call it? Pre-cap? Yeah. So you'll find out what we're going to talk about anyway. Chris, I'm going to go ahead and toss it over to you to give us a breakdown on Euthyphro.
Euthyphro. Euthyphro is great. It was one of Plato's dialogues about what ended up being a linguistic exercise, but it has to do with how we arrive at an understanding of piety. I think Paul has a better grasp on that part, especially the argument itself. Is that right? That piety is what the gods love?
Yeah,
That's
the
not
term
right.
piety is, what the gods love. So when Plato asks what is called the first philosophical question, and he says, is the pious pious because it is pious, or is the pious pious because the gods love it? Right. And what he's trying to basically flush out is whether or not morals are objective or subjective. And what he's saying there is, are things good merely because the gods love them, or is the goodness what inspires the love of the gods?
Okay.
So
wait. So the gods loving it means that's like what? So Apollo loves wisdom. Is that what you mean by the gods loving it?
Exactly. Yeah. But because Apollo loves wisdom is not the virtue, is not what gives wisdom its virtue. Wisdom is virtuous, which causes the gods to love it.
Right. So the gods are subject to loving it. So
exactly. Yes. Perfectly put. Okay. The best way to put that is even gods are subject to moral laws. If morality is objective, then even God is subject to the moral law.
Oh, okay. So the world that God lives in is fit by the good or love or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to interrupt right now because Laura Livengood's already bringing the deep questions here, and
All
wants to know is Comcast good or evil?
No comment.
They're definitely evil.
If they're watching, they're awesome. If not, totally evil. Morals, moral laws regulating the universe or governing the universe in the same way that physical laws are. So is the fact that something is morally wrong, is that as objectively true as the law of thermal expansion is? Like, are there moral laws governing the universe the same way that there are physical laws governing the universe?
And so, what do you by universal? You mean objective, right?
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
we were talking about that last time. Meaning that if you were there to observe it or weren't there to observe it, it would occur either way.
Yes.
Or somebody else was there to observe it, it would be a consistency in an outcome.
Yes.
But it sounds like the Greeks decided what was good is just based on whatever the gods love, right? I mean, that's how they're defining good. Because I'd like to hear you guys flush out for me because when I was asking you before, when we had the conversation about good and evil, we initially began it with, you have to define one or the other, right? And usually starting from that place of good, and then by defining the other,
Right.
It's not so much bad. It's just, this is good, and now what is not good, So
Well, that's more of our conversation with Nietzsche, I think, is when we're going to talk about where the root cause of morality comes from, like why we even start that. But still, I think it's important before we get too far into that to really establish and hammer home what objectivity is and what we mean by the objectivity of morals, because that's what Plato's trying to establish, is that moral standards are not some subjective construction that are a manifestation of man's relation to the world. They're actually a part of the world, and they're as real as any object in the world. So there's a chair right there in front of my desk. There's also moral laws out there for me to abide by. And that's what Plato's trying to ask that question of Euthyphro when he says, is the pious pious because it is pious, or is the pious pious because the gods love it? And I think in the end, what he's saying is that what something is different than what happens to it.
Right. Exactly. So then achieving piety is done for its own sake, not because you're trying to receive reward from the gods' enthusiasm. Right?
Yeah, I think, and that's what Plato and Socrates are establishing, is that if you're merely trying to appease the gods, then you're not being pious. Being pious is doing something that even the gods must appease to and are subservient to. So basically, the will of the gods does not influence what is good and what is evil. The will of the gods is still subservient to what is good and evil, at least according to Plato.
I'm going to jump in here and mention that I see a bunch more names in chat now. Thanks for joining us. I saw Melissa H had to go real quick, but thanks for sticking around, Robert and Jim and
thanks everybody.
Michael and Jeffrey Pearson there has the same thing to say as I said to you guys the other day. What I feel like love is the moral compass for good and evil. That's what I was saying, that if your actions stem from a place of love, but again, how to objectively quantify or qualify what is love was hard for any of us to come up with.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, that's the hard thing, is when you're talking about objectivity, you're almost talking about measurability. And measurability is very difficult, especially when it comes to stuff like morality, where there's no gauge for such a thing. And so, yeah, with love actually is a very compelling foundation to ethics, but it's also very difficult to measure, and it's very difficult to substantiate. And there's as many arguments for why love is just a chemical reaction as there are for why love is more meaningful than just a chemical reaction.
And
yeah,
Robert,
I would agree.
Oh yeah, Robert here was mentioning the collective agreement. We're going to get into collective or herd. What is it? Herd
morality.
Herd morality. Yeah, we're going to get into that when we start talking about Nietzsche too. Yeah, kind of that group God or self kind of
So is there anybody?
dynamism that you're
Is there
talking
anybody in the chat that's discussing like whether they're moral realists or not?
about. Not yet.
Are they
not yet.
anticipating our discussion?
I'm ready to go there when you are, though. If you want to start.
Oh no,
heading
I
that
think
way.
we still got to get into Nietzsche and such,
All
but
right.
Oh, so what are we gonna do with Nietzsche then? What is his problem with the good and the evil? Is there something inherently appealing about making certain values, or is it just a bunch of
hoopla.
Zarathustra?
Well, I would say first of all, yeah, the thing that'll throw people off is oftentimes, even with the title of our show, we're calling it Good and Evil, which people are going to think, oh, they're going to talk about Beyond Good and Evil. But I'm not going to talk about Beyond Good and Evil. I'm going to talk about the genealogy of morals, which the genealogy of morals is an amazing book. I cannot recommend it enough. It is hilarious, very like accessible and well written. Like if you want an inroad to philosophy, Nietzsche's a great inroad because not only is he hilarious and clever, but he's a good writer and he's got a great sense of humor. So, but anyway, he wrote this book, The Genealogy of Morals. And what Nietzsche wants to do is he thinks that in order to understand morality, we should go back to the roots of morality and understand what prompted us to even consider a thing called morality. Right. And according to Nietzsche, one of the things that he tries to distinguish in morality is a master-slave morality. And to do this, he basically talks about how there's an origin to us making moral judgments. And so like,
master-slave, hold on. That's master-to-slave morality, or a morality of the master and a master of the slave as being distinct from each other?
It's like a dichotomy. So it's like the master-slave morality is what Nietzsche posits as an alternative to the like systems of all the other ethical systems that preceded him, including the one of Plato that we just discussed.
Posits, this is what he presents as his example for how to think about this, right? Okay.
Puts it forward, yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool. So master and slave, which is the worst?
So according to Nietzsche. Now, yeah, this is going to throw people off because master-slave just sounds like the master's going to be the bad guy and the slave's going to be the good guy. That's actually the opposite, or at least it's kind of counterintuitive opposite. But anyway, according to Nietzsche, there's a healthy morality and there's an unhealthy morality. And I would say that associates the healthy morality is the master morality and the unhealthy morality is the slave morality.
And what do we mean by health? So
healthy would just be something that affirms life, essentially. I would say life affirming, right?
So we're saying that the superlative is a full life as opposed to a less fulfilling life.
Exactly. And and to understand that, you can use his basically his illustrations of the slave morality as the Judeo-Christian morality.
Right.
So Nietzsche thought that the Judeo-Christian morality was one of the slaves because he thought that the Christians basically made a virtue out of meekness and made a virtue out of self-sacrifice. And Nietzsche had issues with that. Nietzsche thought that to celebrate meekness was not a good thing. And he thought that what the Judeo-Christian tradition was attempting to do was to drag down the masters, the powerful, and all morality is a control mechanism to stop the powerful from being powerful, so that it's like almost like a revenge of the weak on the powerful.
The sheep go to heaven, the goats go to hell.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And he makes the most hilarious like little allegory about it, where he's like, that lambs dislike great birds of prey is not surprising. But he's like, but the birds of prey might view this a little ironically and say, we don't dislike these little lambs. In fact, we love them. Nothing is more tasty than a tender lamb. So it's really messed up.
Right.
And so we're starting to get a sense of why people started relating Nietzsche with Nazism. I feel like if you misread,
if you drastically misunderstand Nietzsche, you can.
But let's get into that. Like because that's an important.
But hold on, let me illustrate one more before we go on to talk about because we have the master morality that would I say by Nietzsche be embodied by Greek philosophy and the Greeks valued strength, they valued beauty, they valued virility, and he would distinguish that from the Christian morality, which values meekness and self-sacrifice. And basically he wants to use each one of those as a representation of each one of those moralities. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, that's but that even makes him sound more like
oh yeah, no, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah,
Right.
So but then go on about that. But what I found interesting about that master slave mentality was it's not, it sounds like it's about power, but it's about empowerment, kind of. If you are empowered enough to make your own decisions, then you can achieve that. What was it? The Ubermensch step.
Yeah, well, one thing that I always found helpful by understanding Nietzsche is he emphasizes what there are two German words for power. One is Macht and one is Reich. And I'm sure you'll recognize Reich because that's the Third Reich, right? So that's the power over others. And Nietzsche doesn't emphasize that power. Nietzsche emphasizes self-power, which is Macht, which is power over oneself. And I would say that's what Nietzsche would claim to be one of the highest virtues, is to master oneself and to have control over oneself. And if you think about it, it's one of the hardest things to do in the world, is to have self-control.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. I was telling you guys I lashed out at a couple of meetings this week because of my lack of self-control, because of after having this kind of iconoclastic conversation about I don't know, sometimes it feels nihilistic, the conversations we have, and I go into meetings with people with strong values, and then I say, no, it's the other way around. But anyway, I won't get into the details of that, but it emphasizes my own need for self-control.
Right.
But that's the other thing. It feels like when I exercise self-restraint, it seems like we're talking about the slave morality then, because even things like manners and things are something that society has decided upon, that we value. And if you don't say excuse me after you burp in public, then that's frowned upon. But that's part of the slave morality too, right? I mean,
Well,
yeah.
when I think
you're
of
the
Nietzsche,
master, though, so isn't that
when I think of Nietzsche, the point is about power and how you apply power. And so if you are seriously talking about power, then exercising power is not the same thing as dominating other people. And so exercising control demonstrates much more power than freaking out on somebody. And what he's saying is that the Ubermensch, the mythical future race that will inherit the earth, that will be idealistically coherent with his philosophy, are not born, will not be here. Aspiring to that helps usher them in, which means exercising control effectively over yourself so that you can become an ideal. That would be exercising control over yourself. So
well,
I think
we should distinguish how we're talking about Nietzsche as an anti-realist as opposed to Plato, who is a realist or a moral realist, because I mean that's what Nietzsche said he was as a philosopher. He said, I am the inverted Platonist. And I think that's what he's doing, is he saw, I mean, there is a very compelling case to be made for Plato. Plato has a compelling case, but I think that Plato's the best case for an example of moral realism. And I think Nietzsche is a really good example of anti-realism. And that it's going to be awkward to talk about morality in the law after we've established that morality might just be bubkiss, but I still want to make that illustration that there's these two camps of moral realism and anti-realism. And when we talk about morality in the law, we're going to act like we're moral realists in some ways, or at least I am in sometimes.
All right.
And Sandra Scholes was saying she hasn't read Nietzsche in 33 years, so hopefully we're giving her some good memories to sift through. I'm rusty myself, and and that's only from like 10 or 15 years ago that I was reading some of this stuff, and it was mostly the gay science. But I remember Nietzsche was, how'd you describe him, Paul? It was pretty good. Reading Nietzsche is kind of a good primer for all philosophy, because he's pretty easy to read and entertaining.
Yeah, well, he's so freaking poetic. I mean, his writing style is insanely beautiful. Like, and it's freaking hilarious because it's beautiful and then pessimistic at the same time. So you have this like rank anger hidden that's like in between the lines of this beautiful freaking prose that he writes. So you have to be clever enough to find it, but once you do, it's always entertaining and you will enjoy yourself thoroughly.
Gold mine.
It is. But yeah, the good and evil stuff. I mean, with Nietzsche, I think that's a critical thing. Is like I think we all do value. I mean, no pun intended, but we all value values, and I think Nietzsche is trying to discuss why we value values and what the value of valuing value is. You know, so and. I mean, that we'll get into the discussion of law and morality here soon, but I think that's an important distinction for people to keep in mind, that when we make these laws, we're making them as though we have access to this moral realism and that we know what the good is. And when we make these laws, we are enforcing a version of the good. So that's always something to keep in mind.
So let's define that good for modern day. I was keeping an eye out, and it sounds like most of our listeners or commenters today are agreeing with the idea that love should dictate our moral compass. And and I know that at this point you're saying, well, anyway, weigh in on that. I'm still.
Well, do you think love is like a condition? Is love an emotion? And that's
you have to define it first.
Right.
So you have to. So good and evil is essentially a polemic. It is tension between what people want to happen and what people don't want to happen. When you talk about love as a solution or a harmonizer for that struggle, you aren't acknowledging the shadow of love, right? Love's great, and love is whatever you want it to be. It's not whole without its shadow, without the part of it that isn't so beautiful, without the ugliness.
Is that
Nietzsche looked past aesthetics and past the superficial to the essence, and I think that's why he resonated so much, especially in philosophy. He was forgotten actually for a long time, but he has such a profound impact, especially on people getting into philosophy, because it's about essence over image. And love is a wonderful image. It's just not a very coherent idea. We all know love in that we have experiences that we can describe as love, but we can't say that they exemplify love, right? And so you were talking earlier about the other, and I think that's an important part of any discussion of the good, which is essentially what you would say love is. Love is an instantiation of what our culture considers the good. The good of our society would be love, would be acceptance, would be all of these, like this constellation of different, things. But in the end, you cannot appeal to something that isn't whole. So saying we'll just use love is the same thing as we'll just use money to fix it. Well, money has vagaries and dredges and things that cause problems. And so when we talk about love, sure, I think that's a great appeal, as long as it is, a full range, a well-developed idea of something that everybody can access. I mean, the rules have to apply to, everybody as much as they have to be as meaningful to everybody as they are to, say, a sociopath, someone who may not be able to access that experience, right? So you're creating an automatic outclass right there. So sociopaths would resent the idea of love being the superlative, and that's what I think that the concept of looking at that, of accessing the slave morality, even if you're like a straight master or moralist and you make all of your own decisions and you're like, well, why can't everybody get this together? Looking at the slave morality, I think informs the value of your decisions, that if you made them differently for different reasons, you would not, you wouldn't be yourself. You would be, it would be a less meaningful experience. And so love is great as long as it's the rough, raw, ugly, and because of its ugliness, beautiful love.
I really want the song "What Is Love" to start playing right now.
When it don't hurt me no more.
Yeah, for sure. But I had to mention though, it's not just love. You can't, because I agree also with Jilly Love, who says do no harm. But I was thinking about it, and it's how people interpret love, or your love of somebody else. Let me give you a concrete example. I love my grandma very much, and she's not doing well. She's down in a nursing home in Georgia, and she is not with it most days, most times. And she has said to family, to nursing staff, to me on the phone, that she sometimes wishes that God would just go on and take her. Now, I've looked into our death with dignity law here in Oregon, and it does not, it only allows, and other right to die states, they only allow for terminal patients to be Kevorkianed, you know. And
nice verb. It's really sensitive use of the verb there.
But I mean, but it's, so the point is, we can't, even though it's what she wants, and it's what at this point, because she's just not with it, and she doesn't want to be here anymore. But she, you know, how can we help her, and what kind of morality is there? It feels like humanity in that case is not humane, like trying to preserve a person that doesn't want to be preserved.
When, you know, we're talking about right now, what is the real world application of talking about good and evil? I think this right here, what you're discussing right now, is exactly what is the real world application. Is when you're faced with those kind of decisions, and I mean, what kind of standard do you appeal to? And so if you're not considering this stuff throughout your life, then you're not going to be prepared for those decisions when the time comes, I think. So that, you know, I know this is,
you're ever prepared.
Yeah, this is skipping to the end a little bit, but I'm just saying that this is the value of the discussion of good and evil, is to learn how to deal with these kind of questions.
Well, I feel there's a direct application in that example. So if your grandmother's saying that she has an attitude about this, she's making that autonomously. But if the law says that because of the public good, they cannot accommodate that kind of freedom of decision, the law would be an example of slave morality, whereas your grandma's attitude would be an example of master morality, because she's accepting the consequences of her decisions and her attitudes, while society is using other people to justify its choice to deprive her of her rights.
Absolutely. Yeah. The herd morality is dictating for her to live, whereas her independent and like independently derived morality values death and does not find any value in continuing to exist. You know?
And one causes more misery than the other.
As does mine. Of course, I want her to live, but
absolutely,
at the same time, I want her to want to live more than anything. And if she doesn't, then I don't. And there will be some days where she does want to live, you know, and that makes it harder. But knowing that all of her life, or ever since, for like the last 20 years of her life, she's always said, I don't want to be a burden to anyone.
Right.
And that's all she's ever asked, is I don't want to be a burden to anyone.
So I guess one of the things we could discuss is, like, is it evil for the state to intervene in that scenario at all?
In that case, we have an answer.
Yeah, I feel like, but think about, she's got her cousin who looks after her, and other cousins of ours that would have a totally different mindset on this. Of course, you know, preservation at all costs, preservation of life at all costs, and that's not just
Yeah,
From
but
a
at the
legal
same time,
standpoint, that's from a biblical standpoint, from
but think about
all
all
the
those
things.
same people that claim to value life and stuff. I mean, it all depends on what life. I mean, because
Mhm.
I mean, if you really look at things honestly, if you apply antiseptic or an antibiotic to a cut, technically you're eliminating billions of little bacteria.
Mhm.
Is that
Mhm.
life less morally accountable? Are we less morally accountable to the bacteria life than we are to our lives? Like we
Right,
eat
exactly.
plants. I mean,
Mhm.
that's one of the
Mhm.
discussions with vegetarianism and like, do we have the right? Is it
Right.
evil to slaughter animals on it?
Breatharians.
Like, yeah. Like,
Right.
I mean, we have slaughter camps of animals. Is that okay? A lot of people
Mhm.
would say no. It's probably not,
Right.
And many traditions, Christian included, thought it was respect to the animals. God gave them to us to eat, and many religions have treated the animals with utmost respect. Hunters generally treat animals with utmost respect. They're some of the largest conservationists.
Mhm.
Probably care more about animal life than they do about humans a lot of the time.
Right.
Such is the case with many libertarians or militia or freemen. We know this being Montana boys.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that that's where these systems help us delineate whether or not, as a society, we should continue to accommodate these uh, meat.
Faltering institutions, right?
Exactly.
Laws.
Illustrating these things in these good and evil situations leaves you with a bad guy. And I think that the bad guy is always the person that is trying to be like turned out. That evil is a way of encouraging the people that you have influence over to aspire to what you want them to be and to avoid what you don't want to be. I think Deuteronomy, Old Testament book that outlines the rules or whatever, could have had very like useful like dietary benefits, social
Sure.
benefits, like
Oh yeah. There was a reason you couldn't eat crustaceans, out of the Dead
Right.
Sea. It's because
because they're poisonous,
yeah,
right?
they weren't used to cooking.
What the
and
hell?
all that kind of stuff.
What the hell is leavened bread? I always wondered that when I was reading the Bible. What is
Leaven
leavened
means that it
bread?
has yeast in it.
Okay, that's what I thought.
All right.
So unleavened bread would be whatever, like baking
Yeastless.
soda, eggs, whatever you use to that kind of a leavener. Well, I mean, I guess that's
Okay.
leaven. Yeah, no. So tortillas are not leavened.
I'm going to take a minute
Anyway,
to
let's
totally
not.
steer this back to the thank you all for your kind words in chat there. I really appreciate that. And I was going to mention something that was where was it? Gay science. That's pretty much the only thing of Nietzsche's that I have read. It's a good book. I like it. It's full of essays. It's got one of my
The gay
couple of my
science.
favorites. Yeah.
But
that's the one
gay
I'm-
science is
right?
art, right?
Essays. It's more
Yeah,
like aphorisms.
aphorisms.
Yeah, it's like
How
little
does that differ?
poems.
Poems? Yeah.
Well, essays are
Uh,
like
yeah.
academic
Yeah.
works.
Oh.
Aphorisms
okay.
are 1, 2, maybe 3 sentences.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, the paragraphs and things, right? I mean,
There can be. I mean,
wrote-
it's a much more artistic work than just an
Yeah.
essay, though.
yeah.
Right.
It was good though. I liked it anyway.
Mhm.
But that's what that is. And shit. And I had it a minute ago, but anyway.
Somebody asked about the gay science.
Oh, Robert Pugmire, Pugwire. Sorry, killed it. Was listening to Radhat, not what that was a name that you kept mentioning, Chris, the other day. That I was like, what? I'm gonna have to ask him about that, and then I didn't. Radnat. I don't know what you were saying. Do you know what I'm
I have
talking
no
about?
idea.
Who?
Amit Goswami?
Oh, okay, that's not the same name then. Never mind. But,
No.
okay.
Sorry.
Shit. Now I put it on the spot.
No, that was who it was. That was who you said, but I thought it was
Oh,
the
okay.
same name.
Cool. Yeah, totally.
No.
Back to good and evil, Trey.
Yes.
Anyways, my point was that good and evil is a whip that people use to tell you what to do. And that's
Yes.
why religion has a monopoly on it. And that's why Nietzsche wrote that, was to upend that effort to tell people to behave in a subservient way instead of as a masterful way.
Absolutely. And it's got to also be understood that Nietzsche thought that a lot of the times morality was culturally generated. And so we're born into a Judeo-Christian culture. So we're bequeathed Judeo-Christian values. And so that's what Nietzsche's doing, because Nietzsche's father was a pastor. And so to be the traditional rebellious little bastard son, he had to basically completely disown his father's profession.
Right.
Yeah. Which is kind of funny because I think what's that?
It sounds like Nietzsche was angry and had some good rhymes. Somebody should rap that shit.
I saw something about the epic rap battles involving something.
MC Zarathustra.
Yeah.
There you go. See?
That thing's awesome. Yeah, so good and evil. What do we do with the distinction between master and slave? If master is the best, is the goal to change that attitude about willful slavery, the slave mentality, or is it to find like a meeting place between the two? Like, is this like a realistic distinction, or is this abstract idealistic?
Well, I think the value of what Nietzsche provided with that distinction and with his whole moral philosophy, at least, is that we need to start looking at why we value the things that we value and why that even came about. You know, I mean, it's
his reevaluation of like values.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that was his major project, right?
Yep. It's really interesting when you think about it. Like, why did we even come to think that there is such a thing as good? You know, and it's, you know, when you look at what Nietzsche's saying, he's like, well, Christians saw a brutal world and saw their meekness in that and decided to say that brutal world is bad. I'm good, in distinction from that bad. And Nietzsche thinks that that's just a really unhealthy way to live your life.
As a means to repress that, to like eliminate it from himself?
I guess I don't understand the question.
So he saw that weak. So if Nietzsche's all about power, right? His shadow would be his weakness. Like, he was like a frail dude that couldn't be healthy. Like, all these things. Like, you can see the psychology in his philosophy. But that shadow, and I don't want to jump off and go into Jung right now. But with his predilection, does that make it a specious argument? Is power worth that pursuit? Like I was saying with love, like using love as a superlative doesn't give you the full scope. And I don't think that using power that same way gives itself the same. What do we do with the weak? What do we do with the sheep?
Well, just as you said right there, you talked about how love is what some people are going to ground their morality in, and Nietzsche's going to ground his in power and affirmation. Right. So, whereas you can't really measure power either, but you can measure its effect, and you can see that you have an effect on the world when you're powerful. And the same thing can be said probably about love. It's just that with Nietzsche, power is more substantial because it's what asserts our selfness into the world. It's how we establish ourself as self.
So he sees us striving to fill our world with ourselves.
Totally. Yeah. When you said
my
that
daddy owned a railroad, so I'm going to own a bigger railroad.
Totally. Well, when you said Nietzsche is talking about power, I think one of the best ways to talk about Nietzsche is that he's always discussing how to empower oneself to more power. And that's always what he wants to do.
And that's where the Nazi thing got confused.
Yeah. Well, the Nazis just are idiots because they were like, oh, yeah, Nietzsche's fucking talking about the blonde beast. And the blonde beast was exactly the opposite of Nazis. Because if you talk about what Nietzsche's idea of the Overman was, the Overman said, do not follow orders. And what was every fucking Nazi's excuse for being a Nazi? Oh, I was just following orders. Well, then you weren't a fucking Overmensch. And the most hilarious thing about the Overmensch is that Nietzsche's probably his best example would be an artist. And guess who flunked out of fucking art school? Hitler. You know?
Big age.
So Hitler was exactly the opposite of what Nietzsche would consider the Overman.
Right. Totally.
So let me ask you then, because this is all seething in my mind here when I consider our revolution, you know, like the whole political revolution, it sounds like definitively falls into that whole slave category, because we're all following Bernie more or less as our kind of messiah leading us. You know, we follow marching orders from him. How does that?
But that's only if you become a cult. If you become a cult of Bernie, then that's bad. But if you just follow Bernie's because he continues to embody the virtues that you value, then that's great. But it's the problem with American politics. I mean, look at Trump. These dumbasses don't give a shit what his policies are because it's a cult. They don't care about good and evil. They don't care about anything that he's doing. They just worship Trump, and whatever he does, they'll do it. And I don't think it's wrong to go with Bernie as long as the values that Bernie espouses are your values. But when it becomes just, I love this guy because he's the guy that is, you know, the head of whatever, then that's just an empty worship, according, in my opinion, at least.
What if Trump supporters really truly value what they feel like are his morals?
They've already proven that they don't, though. How many times has he done flip-flops and completely done the opposite of what he claims to do? I mean, they'll defend him on both sides of his hypocrisies. And so it's like they've proven that they don't give a shit about that. Like
right. And the point is that it's Nietzsche. Okay. So my interpretation is that the master slave mentality is a distinction about intellectual honesty. And that's where the Trump fetishizing is distinct from and like an authentic, personally reasoned out expression. It is a bandwagon. It is an agreement with a bunch of other people about he's the closest they're going to get. A lot of people, right?
Yep.
Exactly.
Totally.
But then the Bernie phenomenon, there is a lot of the slave mentality, but a lot of what holds people onto the movement so far after, which has become the like afterglow effect, is the authentic enthusiasm for what he was trying to do, because he's a pretty good compromise in the democratic system between the actual popular interest and what can be accomplished within the actual party. I mean, he's
well, and I think one thing that's dangerous is we should holding society to Nietzsche's standards is a little bit of a high bar, man. Yeah, it's like we were talking about. Shit. We were all talking about how whenever somebody reads Nietzsche, they always read it as though they're the overmen that he's writing about. And the ironic thing is, most of the time, you're not, I'm not, none of us are. So
he wrote it so that you couldn't be.
Exactly.
I feel certain 45 would picture himself as the Ubermensch, where he
and believe it through and
yeah,
through.
That's the perfect Nazi right there. Believing you're the Overman when you're anything but, you know?
Right. Exactly. So it's not about like, oh, we shouldn't have voted for Trump, and this is why Nietzsche said it. It's understanding that the reasons for Trump's success are similar to Bernie's, but that there's a lot more true believers in Bernie.
Well, yeah, I think the thing with Bernie is that, and that's what we're getting to, is that we do have, whether we want to admit it or not, there are things that we believe in morally. And Bernie, to the movement of Bernie supporters, embodies the values that they want to see instantiated in their laws. And right now, we see laws that are not fucking just. This system is not just, and we want it to be just. That's what morality is. We want morality in the law to be in line with one another, and they are not. And, you know, I mean, we were going to talk about it, and I'm going to get into it eventually, but Philando Castile, man, we just watched a massive miscarriage of fucking justice. We watched a fucking lynching on video of a cop murdering a fucking innocent man. And it was on video, and the justice system still cannot find the fucking balls to actually address this situation. And you want to talk about good and evil? What I witnessed that in that video, I consider to be evil. And I consider that the fact that our justice system cannot even address that to show how weak it is. This justice system is basically in the way of morality a lot of the times.
Yeah. And you guys had basically had me convinced that the law could be nothing other than an obstruction to morality. Can you get into that a little bit in general, a little bit more general terms than Philando, poor Philando.
Yeah. So a system tasked with defining an abstract idea and then enforcing it makes it apply measures that are interpreted. Okay. So a police force tasked with defending justice, right, has to interpret what justice is, right? So when we were talking about Plato the other day, that's what he was saying with the Philosopher Kings is these dudes have to understand that it is the worst job you're ever going to have. And you have to do it above other people or else it's going to destroy you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When a police officer goes in for a job interview and they're like, God, I hope I'm going to be a cop. And they're like, hey, you're a cop now. Here's a fucking gun. So this person is tasked with defining justice. Okay. So justice, the harder you hold on to it, the easier it is to slip away, right? The harder you hold on to good, you're like, this is good. This is good. And things change. And then all of a sudden it's not good anymore, right?
Mm.
It's the tying it down to reality. Okay.
It's like Nirvana albums, kind of, or Beavis and Butthead.
I need to interrupt for I need to interrupt for a second and ask you keep saying it's up to the cop to define justice. That I disagree. It's our legal system that defines justice. It's cops that are meant to enforce justice, and we have put them in a situation where the means of enforcement and the training is weapons.
Absolutely. Their interpretation of justice is what's the problem, and we give them far too much power in that system.
There you go. Yeah.
Yep.
It's all very systemic, top down kind of thing. But and I think part of what you guys were arguing the other day was that it's impossible to work, that railing against that system, you're still engaging it, and so therefore you're perpetuating what doesn't have to necessarily be. If we were able to think creatively, a new dawn of reasoning kind of thing around the problem of government or oppression, having to legalize or regulate everything. Sorry, that might be a bit too sprawling of a question to ask you or to expect you to weigh in on, but you get where I'm going.
I hate cops. That's all I got.
Yes, I'm tired of police brutality, and yeah, I think that's one of the things. I think that's one of the main things I wanted to hammer home in this episode was that we have a very big problem in this country of our laws being damn near immoral. We are enforcing injustice, we are enforcing immorality, we are enforcing horribleness, and we have to stop. Like it is. I mean, I cannot believe that we have an acquittal or a mistrial with Cosby's rape trial. On the same day, we have a goddamn Philando Castile's murderer walks free. It's to the point where how can we not have riots in the street? How are we not more pissed off? I mean, I have to think that we should have had like 7 or 8 revolutions at this point, and that's why I'm very heartened by the new resurgence in activism, but it's also just very disheartening to see how far how far morality and the law have diverged.
Yeah. I got 2 questions here before you guys move on. First of all, Chris, you know how I talk about police, right? But I don't hate them all. Are we going platoon mentality here? Well,
I was talking about justice because it is incumbent on the police officer to determine what the just course of action is, and then to arrest the person for infraction on a crime. Once you take on that badge and you go under the umbrage of the police department and you follow the guidelines, that becomes your responsibility. It's like the Nuremberg trials. They were responsible because they participated in the system.
I agree with that.
I'm saying that being a police officer is about dislocation of power from a community. That's why I hate cops, because they are parts of the community doing the bidding of people typically not in the community.
Well, they're a dishonest institution in a lot of ways. They claim to be protecting the public, and in most cases, it's even acknowledged secretly that they're just social control and to maintain a status quo.
Exactly, well, they are social control.
So
I would encourage you to. I would encourage you to get to know your cops in your local town because it's. I know, Chris, you know all your cops.
I know the names of my police officers. I have had run-ins with them since I was in high school.
That's right.
I know these police officers.
It's a town of 2,200 people, if you're wondering. That's
with like 20 cops.
Yeah.
And a reputation for being bad cops. But that's not the point. It's not the point.
It's around. It is kind of, because around here, at least, or at least know your police structure, because around here, Chief Sassaman and his police, he's always looking for people who are not cops to come join the force, right? People who have other jobs. Do
those cops put guns on their hips?
They do.
Then fuck them.
You know, but it's hopefully it's all last resort thing, and I agree with you that
it tends not to be
that they don't have to that they shouldn't have to carry guns, or they shouldn't maybe be allowed to.
If they have the responsibility for defining the end of somebody's life, they should have a good idea of justice.
So what's the difference between our cops and Germany's cops and Switzerland's cops?
Well, they don't. Do they carry guns?
Not generally. So, what's the real difference here? It's not the person. What's the difference?
The arms, the weapons.
Not just the weapons. I mean, Germany. That's where I'm going here. I mean, you guys are talking about a symptom. What's really the problem here in the cop world of the United States of America? You know?
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
I think the problem, if we're going to get down to it with cops, in my opinion, the problem is that we allow these people to have insane amounts of power with very little credentials. If you look at the training, I've seen states where it's harder to be a fucking beautician than it is to be a cop, or at least it's about as hard. And if we're going to give people this much power, they should have to, I mean, I just think our standards for
rigorously exercise specific values that are common to their communities.
Yeah, if we're going to give them that much power, they have to be vetted. I mean, it just seems like these cops that are killing people every fucking day, they're not cut out for the work. Every time they say, "Oh, I was feared for my life," then you shouldn't be a cop. If you can't handle these situations in a responsible manner, that's what you're paid to do. And obviously something's failing, because these cops are scared of everything, and it's just insane to me that this is the excuse that still is used.
I read once how somebody who is trained in the what was it now, SEALs, I think, to be fighting overseas, they made a much better cop because the rules of engagement are so completely different. But it's like you engage with a gun at very last resort. And they talked about this. I read about this case where a guy came in and he was getting kicked off the force because he didn't shoot the black guy that was trying to break into his own home, basically. And the other cops did. They came around and shot the guy dead. And this was because, again, he said he felt like he posed no threat. The guy was sorry, I might be getting some of the details wrong. It might not have been his own home. He might have been seriously trying to break into somebody else's home with a knife. But the point is, he wasn't actively trying to stab anybody with it. He was just pretty much minding his own business. But sorry, I got sidetracked because I forgot the details. But
the problem that we're addressing here is that the people like cops that are supposed to be upholding moral standards and moral goodness are people that are actually doing the opposite. And I think that that's a terrifying and really important problem to address.
Mm-hmm. If we're to apply the master-slave morality distinction to police officers, abiding by the rule of the law would be adhering to the slave mentality. That the group of people who have made that decision are more informed than they are the person involved in the immediate context to determine what is right and what is wrong. So if that power is bestowed on that person and they are able to look at a situation and say, that kid is carrying a toy freaking gun, I don't need to shoot him. versus a culture where they are achieving more success with their peers because of that decision to shoot that child. That there is a distinction between a morality that is coherent and just and a morality that is wildly out of whack and disproportionate to the amount of power that person can wield.
Yeah,
and
totally.
If these are not rigorous philosophical inquiries into these people's understanding of what people are entitled to do and what they are prohibited from doing, there's no sense in bestowing on them the power to end a freaking life. And I think that this is our chickens coming home to roost. We were lazy in defining what a police officer is because it's really a social control structure imposed on us to make our own neighbors our informants. That the point is that we have been infiltrated and we have embraced our repressors, and we are starting to see that they are abusers. They are Pinkertons of our age. They're here to break us, and fuck that.
Oh, dude, look at all the people. No, you're
that,
totally right. Look at every time there's a police shooting, there's always some sick bastards that are defending it. And every time there's just somebody like he had it coming or whatever. And it's very discouraging. And that's why I think we need to have more rigorous understanding of good and evil so that we can address these more substantially.
They need to be philosopher kings.
That's right.
It would help. It would help for sure. And hopefully. Yeah, right.
I want to go on record saying what I think about Scalise.
That's slippery because
that was a whole part of my that's how I started the conversation for our dry run. I was like, part of me couldn't just help but say, oh, I wish I'd have been there to see the looks on those faces. And then I instantly regretted it, because that's a shame. Yeah, feeling of shame for wishing ill upon other people. And I think that's that kind of master morality at play, that dualism. But I'm accepting it. I'm acknowledging it. I'm choosing the higher path on my own. Does that make sense?
That sounds great.
I'm not saying anything about Scalise.
So, yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, so there was no setup for that.
No context for that one.
Oh man, sorry about that. We were talking about Scalise there. Yeah. So
they were talking.
Who?
So we're gonna
that's right.
go out with a piece by about Zarathustra, right? This is all about Nietzsche's big book.
Yeah.
You'll also remember it from 2001. Dun 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 dun. It's awesome, man.
So I have the piece, guys, but I don't know where you want me to. I don't know where you want me to start it. Where do you want me to?
Start at the beginning.
It's a 30-minute piece. How long are we gonna go?
Yeah, stop at 1 minute.
Just 1 minute? Oh, all right.
Yep, that's all I need.
All right.
That's when it winds down.
Are we winding down? Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thanks everybody.
For joining us.
Great.
Hanging in there.
Thanks, John.
We started.
If I offended you, I'm really sorry. Pops, really don't jive with me.
Thanks for everybody coming out.
Yeah.
All right. No, I was gonna say you guys can go if you want to ramble on another 4 minutes. We started late. But that's right. You want to say goodbye? We'll say goodbye.
Yeah.
We're done.
Like and share.
Yeah, please share. And thanks for coming out.
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
You guys didn't hear me, did you? I need 2 seconds. So,
okay. Full 2 seconds. All right. Yeah. I was counting in my head, but yeah.
You should beatbox for him, Trey.
Here you go, guys. It's terrible.
Yes.
Are we still live?